that goes bigger, farther than the county, then Santa Barbara County, at least, I think could help. And yeah, I think that's kind of my main suggestion there.
Okay, great, excellent. Well, thanks for both suggestions, or all of your suggestions, and bringing these ideas up. Great. Okay. And we should, I suppose, yeah, I want to make sure that the clean cities are represented at some point going forward as well, unless there's anyone on the call today from Clean Cities. Okay. All right. So what we've been discussing is sort of, discussion question number one. What charging infrastructure investments are planned? I think we've got some really good insights. Anything else on this topic? Oh, okay.
Sorry. Yeah, sorry. I'm trying to find the button. This is a very important project given the governor's priorities of even limiting personal vehicles to only electric by 2035. I was hoping maybe you had some information to elaborate on that and what those impacts could be.
Well, so a couple of things. I think from my perspective, what is important about this is that it sets a specific time frame. Those of us in the industry are pretty aware that electric motors are replacing internal combustion engines as the form of traction power for basically all modes of transportation. That's happening anyway. The question has always been, well, when? And so this provides a specific time frame. I don't think it's that, Frank, in my opinion, it's not that significant. It's not that aggressive, because I think it's going to happen anyway. We're seeing battery prices, if it wasn't for supply chain dynamics currently, battery prices have been falling significantly enough that we expect that electric vehicles will hit price parity with ICE vehicles within the next several years. But the question was, okay, so when will we see the transition? So that sets a very specific time frame for that. That said, there'll still be lots of internal combustion engine vehicles on the road, probably by 2035, because it takes 20 years before a vehicle ages out of public use. But we will see a decline. I mean, we're already seeing EV sales are starting to outpace other types of vehicles around the world, in markets like China and parts of Europe, where there's strong enough incentives. So I think that what this is just more evidence that it's going to happen, and a very specific time frame as to when. This plan, we're looking out, over the next 10 years or so. So this is the interim between now and then. That's just some context. Hopefully that answers your question. And again, that's for light duty. For medium and heavy duty vehicles, it's going to take a little longer. They're much more dependent on batteries. Batteries are still very physically large, and they're heavy, and so that impacts payloads. So it's going to take a little longer for medium and heavy duty to reach price parity. Right now, heavy duty vehicles are anywhere from 2 to 3 times the price of a diesel equivalent, whereas with light duty vehicles, it's probably more like 20 to 25% price premium. So, and then in some cases, there's very little price premium, like with the electrified F-150 pickup truck, the Lightning. So we're already starting to see that transition for light duty. It's going to be a little while before we see it for medium and heavy duty. And as a transit operator, you're probably aware that electric buses, I think, are about twice, battery buses are about twice the price of diesel.
Quite aware.
Hopefully NOLO and other opportunities will help address that. Okay, well, on the topic of incentives, any thoughts, recommendations regarding what kind of incentives should be addressed in this plan? Or the inverse of that, are there current disincentives that we should remove? Like, you look at that question either way.
Could you share examples you've seen elsewhere of incentives or disincentives? Are you aware of any, like, just to help us?
Sure. So some standard examples would be free. Well, so in California, one of the great examples is you can drive in the HOV lane. So this is a non-monetary incentive, but it helps give another reason to drive an electric vehicle, right? So okay, maybe it costs me a little bit more to buy a Mustang Mach-E than whatever the Escape hybrid maybe, but hey, I can get to my job quicker. So that's a form of an incentive. Sometimes you get preferential parking for electric vehicles. So those are non-monetary incentives. Permitting, you can expedited permitting to get charging. And then of course, there's various utility incentives. So PG&E over the years has had various incentives for chargers that provide charging infrastructure. I did a project in PG&E territory back in 2017. It was a fleet project. PG&E provided all of the chargers for that fleet. So that was a great incentive. Electric vehicles, the federal government has a tax incentive where you get $7,500 off qualified vehicles. They recently, under the IRA, they changed the program, so now you have to have vehicles built in America, and specifically the batteries themselves. Going forward, it's a fairly complicated thing, but it creates a incentive to buy U.S. built electric vehicles. Some states, including California, have state tax incentives as well that can stack with those. So those are just some examples. There's others as well. Sarah, you may have some thoughts to add to that as well. I don't know. This is, by the way, Sarah is from DKS as well. She's dutifully taking notes to capture this discussion. Hopefully she's capturing everything, because I had the recording off accidentally for a few minutes, but hopefully and this is being recorded. Hopefully that's okay with you. I just want to make sure we capture all this information. So incentives, disincentives. Okay.
Mike,
So
I have one. I think one of the largest barriers in the county right now is just not having access at multifamily housing. I'm not sure of a way to, incentivize that, for landowners. One potential idea is to, incentivize employers to put charging stations, at their campuses, so that those who don't have access to charging at home can charge at work. But it's kind of a complex issue, and I think if there isn't a way to incentivize getting access to more multifamily renters, that's huge.
Well, yes, absolutely. That's part of our project scope as well. One issue on this is that, to my understanding, most multifamily housing is located within the incorporated areas rather than in the rural areas. So, but I think, there are, I haven't actually had a chance to look at that yet for this county, but where there are some incentives. Sarah, that's really her specialty and why she's on the project team, because her background is residential charging. And that, as you noted, is a really important challenge. And workplace charging is a workaround. Public charging is another workaround. Okay. Other thoughts on?
Yeah. So I'd say this just as a person who lives in a multifamily unit, has an electric car, can't charge it at home, and do charge it kind of where I can, or I battle my coworkers on days I drive to get some electrons every couple weeks or so. But yeah, I mean, it's a tough nut to crack for sure. I think having easily accessible charging kind of everywhere, right, makes it easier to, whether you're going and plugging it in on the weekend or depending on how much you're driving. But obviously workplaces, I kind of mentioned that, especially if you work at a place that has charging infrastructure. And if you think about the largest employers in Santa Barbara County, right, they're institutions like UCSB, City of Santa Barbara City College, things like that, who kind of have a little more juice, no pun intended, to be able to provide these kinds of things and come up with some sort of scheme for employees to use them. But yeah, I mean, it's hard obviously to get like apartment owners to do literally anything that benefits their tenants. So yeah, I just don't quite know what that is. Now, obviously, one might be an education piece of, the law being that if you live in a multifamily unit that doesn't have charging, they have to let you got to pay for it as a tenant, but they have to let you install that infrastructure, which I think a lot of people don't know. But that's been on the books for a long time. So that would be good to sort of highlight for folks. And then
That is, I was not aware of that. That's really important. It's interesting because we've a year ago, we were talking to a lot of apartment buildings and homeowners associations, and individual drivers such as yourself that were purchasing EVs were frustrated because their HOAs were not sympathetic to the need. This is in condos, so they're not sympathetic to the needs of the 1 or 2 people who might be driving electric vehicles. Well, fast forward a year, now they're starting to buy EVs as well, and so there's an interest growing from the residents that are starting to really push that. So
yeah, so it might be 10 years old, 8 years old. It was an Al Marasucci bill. Yeah, a really long time ago. So yeah, maybe you can find that. And then the other thing I was going to say, you were saying, I don't work for the county, but you're saying in rural areas or in unincorporated areas, Isla Vista, which is county land adjacent to university, is extremely dense. There's lots of cars there, and there's very little EV charging infrastructure. So there's like a handful of public chargers, and that's it. And certainly those landlords aren't going to put anything in. So thinking about things about on street or stuff like that, I think that's a place where you could get a little bit better adoption. But the infrastructure is just not there.
What area was that you referenced again? I just want to make sure I capture that in the notes.
Yeah, I'll put it in the chat, but
Okay.
Isla Vista.
I think Hillary's making a really important point. If we can't get landlords to do it at the site, then the other alternative, or maybe a symbiotic solution, is to just saturate geographically with charging availability, which creates another problem, right? If you're trying to have the stations pay for themselves through revenue, the more you put out there, the less they pay for themselves, right? And so I think that is an opportunity for incentives, for sure. Increasing the incentives so that payback period is easier would be helpful, because if the saturation is the strategy, like the current incentives don't help. I also think having owned 100 EV charging stations, the frequency with which they break is really challenging. So when you're purchasing EV stations, so when we did it, we did not purchase like a maintenance plan. Then they broke all the time. So then we purchased a maintenance plan, which was more expensive than the stations. So figuring out that piece too, like maybe there's, a program that helps cities and counties maintain their infrastructure too, because the capital investment does not end at the installation. I think that would be important.
That's a great suggestion. That's really good thinking, and we appreciate your insights as a massive charger lord. Yeah, because that's right. I mean, we help our clients in a lot of cases on the design and installation side, and then so the question is, well, who's going to maintain them? Are we going to do it ourselves? And although for a large number like that, it might make sense, but for most of our clients, they don't have that many, so it doesn't justify it to have the in-house capability. And yeah, the maintenance contracts are significant.
Just a quick thought. I know the whole incentives or disincentives feels like a policy question above me, but it presents an interesting opportunity, I think, to unburden Alilia in the city of Santa Barbara. What if within this plan there are those recommendations that employers are responsible? It kind of unburden yourself and let this plan be responsible for developing what the equitable way of using these public paid for facilities in a way that they should be extended, right? To employment sizes of this size and bigger should now be required to have, free or at cost or minimal cost. Maybe this plan is the opportunity to unburden ourselves of individually trying to figure out what that looks like.
Are there many large employers in the unincorporated parts of the county? Do you know?
UCSB, biggest one in the county.
Oh,
It's on
Wow.
state land technically, but it's,
okay.
not in a city.
That's good to know. Okay, so that would be a great example of where, we could use that as an example. There's, that's great.
Chumash Reservation Site, would they be a major employer? Just an idea. I don't know. It's kind of a question.
Casino might be, yeah.
Well, and also casinos tend to be appropriate location for destination charging because you have a captive audience. And they typically are located accessible, easily accessible places from freeways. All right. Okay, so we've talked about, I think we've actually answered this other question. I guess sort of the last question then in our remaining 9 minutes is any advice regarding more EV travel to reduce barriers, sort of other things that we haven't talked about. I think we've kind of covered the ground pretty well, but what else are we not talking about that we should be thinking about?
So curious, the capitalist side of me says, hey, these gas stations which are strategically placed, right, already along travel corridors, I think they will eventually say, hey, in addition to fueling pumps, we'll also have EV charging stations, so that, they remain that, right, a place to energize your vehicle, right, in some way, shape, or form. But, other part of me says, I've given Exxon enough of my money. I don't need to give them any more. This would be a nice way to take it away, or give it to somebody else, right? But yeah, part of it is stimulating the already existing infrastructure to make the conversion. Providing EV infrastructure has become an economic tool, right? I think of like a Tascadero. They were very selective in where they put it, knowing that a Tesla owner had to spend an hour in the downtown area now, right? So they're using that. You're going to have to charge. You might as well do some shopping while you're here. So EV charging becomes an economic development tool, I think, when used appropriately.
Absolutely, and that's something that if you look at where, the networks that I mentioned earlier, EVgo, Electrify America, and Tesla, they tend to be one of their citing criteria, and their citing criteria includes access to retail opportunities. Likewise, NEVI, other incentive programs have done similar things where they're looking for co-located incentives. And certainly that makes a lot of sense if you're building out a new facility, such as the one we were talking about earlier at the transit park and ride. That it makes total sense. They work together. And Shell, for example, Shell Oil Company recently purchased what was used to be called Green Lots. Now it's called Shell Recharge Solutions. So the petroleum industry, it recognizes that if they're going to remain in business, 10, 20 years from now, they're going to have to be selling electrons instead of petroleum. And then, then there's other entrants to the market like Starbucks. So they recognize, hey, we've got locations all over the world, and 20 minutes is about time it takes to get a cup of coffee. They might as well put in DC fast chargers so that they can capture more market.
Yeah, this is Arjun. I just wanted to hit on a few things. My camera's messed up. I'm having technical, sorry about that. One thing is for UC Santa Barbara, it was brought up for our stations out here. Jamie Wagner has been was the TAP manager. He's now retired. We have a new person hopefully coming on soon. So yeah, we have quite a bit of charging out here. And as the demand increases, we have stub ups ready to go to meet the demand. So I agree with Alelia. I mean, if there's operation and maintenance funding included in grants, I mean, I think that's important part of the puzzle. Also, with the low carbon fuel credits, I know the charging stations or start charging networks like to keep them. If there was like a way to, well, I think using those funds for the maintenance and operation might be there might be opportunities there. And then the last one is some people were mentioning, or Ted, thanks for plugging C5. I'm the current board secretary on the Central Coast Clean Cities Coalition. So just wanted to say that.
Great.
Arjun just
Thank
gave me
you.
an idea. And this is maybe a little bit too out of the box and wacky, but I think, so right now as a local government, I can either own and site my own stations, or I can partner with a company that this is their bread and butter and it makes it way easier for me. So that's wonderful. However, if I partner with the company, I have usually no opportunity, or very minimal opportunity for revenue to invest in other programs. And so maybe like a site host bonus that is given to, NGOs, public agencies, to help facilitate, because otherwise we're doing it out of the goodness of our hearts to try and do this in our communities, which is great. That's good, but we could be reinvesting in our own fleets or whatever if we had an added incentive. Plus, we'd be more incentivized by our leadership to move on these projects. There'd be something in it for us. So I think that would be a good thing to consider, where there's a benefit. It's more efficient for us to go with a third party, but we still get something out of the deal.
Excellent. You guys are coming up with some great ideas. This is, by the way, our first of, I think, 5 or 6 such focus groups. So you've raised the bar pretty high to start with a lot of really good input on both the barriers and also addressing those barriers in ways that I personally hadn't thought of. Like maintenance, that's a huge issue from the perspective, not of the driver, but of the perspective of the charger provider, and it has to work as an ecosystem. So again, I encourage everyone to take a look at the existing conditions report that is posted. If there's anything in there that we're not aware of, that we haven't captured, again, we put that together during the summer, so time has changed, so we may want to update that. Also, the social pinpoint is a great place to add suggestions. If you, as not just in your official capacity, but in your perhaps official capacity as an EV driver or a friend of EV drivers, and have heard, folks complaining about various things, this is an opportunity to encourage them to get on there and say, hey, this is your opportunity as members of the community to provide input. But it's an interactive tool, and we'd love to get as much input as we can. Any Sarkis, do you have any last minute or Maya close remarks before we terminate the call?
I can start and hand it off to Maya. Thank you for your time today, everybody. We know you're busy, so this has been really helpful. Mike, do you mind just taking like 30 seconds or so to talk about what's going to happen at the end of this, or how much time is left before we have a draft strategy for everybody, and then when we'll be approving the plan?
I'd have to look at the project schedule, and I'm not prepared for that. So
okay, that's fine. I think we're gonna be wrapping this up in the spring. So as we have more milestones coming up, we'll share that with this group and then the other stakeholders. And then on the funding side that Mike had mentioned, on the federal NEVI funding coming to California, yeah, they use criteria for prioritizing corridors. Unfortunately, we're not in the immediate near-term group. We're probably towards the end of the 5th year, and we don't know how many chargers will be funded. But our team is looking at the federal competitive call for projects that's probably going to be coming out in the next couple of months, and then how the 6 counties can coordinate, or maybe it'll be a county-wide effort to look for charging infrastructure through the competitive program. And I'll hand it off to Maya.
Thanks. I just wanted to echo what Sarkis said and thank everyone for coming and giving really good input for us. We'll definitely keep you updated as we continue with the plan.
Great. Well, we are currently working on the next step in the process. So as I mentioned, we've completed the existing conditions report. Now we're focusing on the sort of addressing exactly what we've been discussing today, looking at the barriers, looking at the opportunities, looking at the funding, and putting that together in the next report. So we need input from all the different stakeholders and focus groups. And so we really appreciate your time and your great ideas. Again, you have access to us through the social pinpoint and website. Feel free to reach out. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Thanks.